It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Kyle Waide. As president and CEO of the Atlanta Community Food Bank, Kyle oversees the distribution of nearly 70 million pounds of food and grocery products annually through a network of almost 700 local and regional nonprofit organizations that feed those in need across 29 Georgia counties. Prior to joining the food bank, Kyle had several management roles at the Home Depot in disaster relief, corporate responsibility, community affairs, and store operations. He also was part of the management team that created Charity Navigator, the nation's premier charity evaluation service. Kyle is a graduate of Harvard University and resides in Decatur, Georgia, with his wife, Christina, and their 3 children. Kyle Waide, welcome into the corner office.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And, we're going to talk a lot about what's going on, given that this is launching on Giving Tuesday. I know a very important event in the Atlanta community. And we'll talk a lot about what the food bank does. But we always like to start to hear a little bit about the early years and what brought you to this CEO position. And maybe just tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Sure. So I'm a public school kid from the American South. My family and I kind of moved around a lot when I was a kid. I grew up in 6 different small towns in the southeastern United States. And so we moved around every few years. My father worked for the most part, for the U.S. Forest Service and Department of Agriculture as a researcher. He's trained as an ecologist, and so he would move around to different research facilities, and we would go with him. And so that's kind of where I grew up. I graduated from high school in Oxford, Mississippi, and just had a lot of fun growing up in those different small towns. Playing sports and going to school, and I had 2 little brothers who were also part of all that moving around, and we were a tight-knit family.
Well, you've got a very mid-Atlantic accent, so you must have lost what other southern twang you had some time ago.
Yeah, well, my father and mother both are from West Texas. My dad in particular is from El Paso.
Right.
And if you've ever spent any time in El Paso, you know that the accent out there is more like the accent of kind of the Mountain West, right? Or the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, et cetera. So he had a very sort of vanilla accent, and I probably picked up, mimicked his voice more than anybody else.
And mom worked at home?
Yeah, my mom was for the most part, she stayed at home with us, but she also worked quite a bit in public school systems. As we moved around, she would work in an administrative assistant role at the central office of different schools. So the high school, she'd be the assistant to the principal or whatever. And so she did that and really loved working with kids and schools, everywhere we lived.
Awesome. And you were the oldest of 3, it sounds like.
Yeah, I was the oldest of three. We were spaced out pretty evenly, 4 years
Uh-huh.
apart in each direction, um, and yeah, I mean, I was the oldest, so um,
You bore the brunt, of course, of a lot of the learnings, I'm sure, for the younger ones. I'm the youngest of three brothers, so I know what that's like. Oh, yeah.
I think my younger brothers probably bore the brunt more than I did. To me, it feels harder to be a younger sibling than an older
Mm.
sibling.
What were some of the things that you remember from mom and dad in terms of, inspirations or lessons learned at those early days, in those early years?
Yeah, I think a couple things stand out to me from my parents that really informed who I am today. I think number one is humility. I
Mm.
think they're both very humble people and give credit to others and aren't don't seek a lot of uh, kind of fanfare recognition for the things that they do. And that's a big part of who I am. I think
Right.
the second thing is I think each of them are very kind of empathetic to people who have less than us, just however
Right.
you want to define that. I think they kind of each of them in their own way believed in helping out those who are less fortunate, and that informs why I think they um, went into professions that were about service to others,
Right. Right.
and I think that's what I've done too.
Yeah.
And then I think they also are the last thing I would hold up is just I think they each exhibited a ton of integrity and
Mm.
in the way that they live their lives and just kind of um, uh, try to live out truthfully who they
The
are
precepts that they
every
believed in.
day.
Yeah,
So
yeah, awesome. Well, your career is awesome. I mean, I know you've served in both the private and the public sector, but it's always been with a very focus, a big focus on charitable giving and giving back to the community. So it sounds like they were your models for that in many ways.
yeah, I for sure think that they helped shape my worldview
Mm,
around wanting to connect more people with opportunities to be their
mm,
best selves, and also kind of one of the products of moving around a lot is I think you become an observer. You can be a good observer
sure.
of some of the larger dynamics that you begin to see play out in the communities where you live, where if you've always lived in the same place, you might be less aware of those things.
Right.
And
Right.
so moving around a lot, I think it was easy for me to see how um, people of certain backgrounds had greater access to opportunity than others did.
Mm,
And to see forms of unfairness or privilege show up in the communities where I lived, and so I think that too has kind of shaped what I'm about. I
right.
think I
Right.
am interested in helping to level the playing field for
Mm,
folks.
excellent. All the moving about, were you a good student in school, or was that a challenge going from place to place?
Yeah, I think the uh, thing that helped me integrate myself in and assimilate in these different communities where I grew up, which were often, small towns in the South are often kind of insular, and um, the people from other places often have a hard time kind of integrating in some of these communities,
Right.
has been just my observation. And what helped me assimilate were two things. One, I was really good in school and uh, to the point really where I could be kind of casual about it. So I was
Mm,
always the kid who finished
didn't
the
need to
math
study.
test super fast, um, and then I would help out people sometimes in ways that were not productive for their learning. Um, and And so I was good in school, so I was known for that wherever I went. And then, secondly, I just played a lot of sports.
That didn't suffer while you moved around. Sounds like.
No. I was a really good student, and I was in some ways really lucky. I think I was naturally
came easier too.
School was easy for me. And my parents certainly placed a lot of value in education and were very interested and invested in how well I did. And so that always worked out for me. Awesome. The other thing that I allowed me to really assimilate in these communities is I played a lot of sports growing up.
What kind of sports were you into?
So I played football and baseball all the way through high school, and then I also played basketball up through about 10th grade, on our different school teams. So I was about sports all day long, every day. And that was a great way to kind of build a community wherever I lived. It was just a way to kind of, again, integrate myself into new places.
Other interests, sports, music, theater, anything like that?
I mean, growing up, I was kind of interested mostly in sports, and I did other things along the way. I got interested in politics some. I definitely enjoy. We went to church, and so church was a big part of my life for a while. I was in the Boy Scouts for up through about 10th grade. So I was involved in them were a distant second to sports and school and doing well in school.
Were there some pretty important coaches and teachers that inspired you along the way? And if so, in what way?
So I would say there wasn't a single, one or two really dominant influences there. I think I was blessed to have positive influences from a variety of coaches and teachers. As I grew up, I had good teachers in a variety of schools who made an impact on me in one form or another. I think I had a teacher in high school, Mrs. Benson, who was really, she was a math teacher, and I think saw something in me and took an interest in me, and helped, knock me around when I needed to be knocked around, when I was doing knuckleheaded things. So she was really good at challenging me and also kind of keeping me in the road. And then on the football side, I had a baseball coach in high school who I spent a lot of time with, for a couple of years. It was a summer league traveling team, and a lot
of time on the road.
And I mean, we would just be together for hours. Our team would be, and we were pretty close as a team, and we would hang out after our ball games as a group, and I just really enjoyed spending time with him. And we talked more about baseball than anything, but I think kind of he helped shape sort of my ability to get really sort of dedicated to something and work hard at it and get better and better and just sort of keep at it in a really positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned church was an important part of your growing up. Is that something that's continued on as you grew into an adult?
Yeah. So my wife and I, we are members of a church here in Midtown Atlanta, All Saints Episcopal Church. It's a great old Atlanta church. And we've been going there for a few years, and our kids are involved in the church. Yeah. And, it's a really welcoming community, the church we're part of. It's got a great kind of history of openness and being welcoming to a variety of different groups who have not always been welcomed
Right.
in kind of mainline Protestant churches, and so we really appreciate the community and the way it's having a positive impact on the lives of our kids.
That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Helps to keep the true north and the guardrails in place, particularly for the younger ones as they grow
I think
up.
so, right? It just connects them to a bigger vision of the world, and our kids. I think we're fortunate in this way. I don't know. They were just sort of born this way. They just have a really sort of empathetic uh, orientation in the way that they interact with people, and they're just very caring and think about how they can serve others, and and the church reinforces that.
Yeah. Sounds like it's part of the Waide DNA.
Perhaps, again, I think, some of it's just good luck, but
Well, the community is important, right?
the community is important.
Yeah.
That's right.
Growing up, did you get involved in social consciousness? Were you a volunteer, during those middle school, high school years? Was that important to you then? Were you doing more entrepreneurial things? How did you, outside of sports, which sounds like it was pretty dominant, were there other areas that you were involved with that kind of helped solidify your commitment to community?
I would say that the commitment to community was not necessarily outside of the stuff we did at church, the stuff we did in Boy Scouts. Not a huge part of my life growing up. I think, I would just do what other kids did.
Right.
So it's not like I was leading the volunteer group at school to go do a bunch of projects, or like some amazing kids do today. I think I kind of came at that later, and I came at it from a point of view of, hey, there's just some of these kids that I spent a lot of time with, kind of sweating and bleeding and fighting, on the sports field. You get past high school and you see kind of what life prospects that they have and what sort of opportunities that they've been able to access, and you feel a certain amount of unfairness around that.
Right.
And so for me, I got to it through a lens of just sort of fairness and justice later in life.
Yeah. Awesome. And you went to college, went to Harvard, from what I understand.
Yep.
How did you decide that's where you wanted to go, and what did you study there?
So, I think I was kind of naive. In some ways, my parents were kind of naive around the whole college process. I look around today at the kind of incredible intensity with which kids and families are trying to figure out where to go to school, and sort of fighting for a spot in a good school.
It's a different world.
It's a different world than the one I grew up in. And again, I was doing well. I did really well as a student, and on certain standardized tests. And I was in Mississippi when I graduated. So, there were fewer of those people in Mississippi who were doing that well. And so I got recruiting information from a lot of schools, encouraging me to apply. And so I picked out 6 that kind of sounded good, and got into 5 of them.
Congratulations.
And Harvard was one of them. And I'm like, well, that seems to be a pretty great place. I'll go there. And
did you go and visit?
I didn't visit there until I showed up, on day one. So I went sight unseen. And that's just it's not probably how we're going to do it with our kids.
Yeah,
but,
it was the way it was done then. Yeah,
but that's how we did it. And most of the kids I went to school with at Harvard had visited before they arrived. I would say the vast majority of them. But that's just the way it worked for me. I got on a plane with a bunch of suitcases and showed up at Logan Airport in Boston and figured out how to get to campus, and there I was for 4 years.
Yeah. What did you study?
I was an English major.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I was in college. My big activities were I was an English major. I was on the literary magazine kind of staff and leadership, and I got involved in a few other things, but that was the main thing that I was involved in.
Awesome. And what was the first job you took out of college? Did you do internships along the way? Was there, tipping your toe in the water in a little bit in a couple of different areas, or did you kind of just work your way through and come back home during the summers?
I kind of worked my way through it, and then so I got right after college. I went to a creative writing program at the University of Arizona.
Awesome.
And got a master's of fine arts at the writer's workshop there. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be a writer.
Yeah.
And kind of write about some of these things that I was preoccupied with around issues of race and injustice. And somewhere along the way, I realized, I don't actually like sitting at a computer by myself all day, writing. And B, I don't have that many great stories to tell. So I even though I kind of went through that program and completed it successfully, I knew as I was leaving that I was not going to be a writer as a career. And as the time to leave was kind of approaching, I kind of stumbled on Teach for America, which is a great national nonprofit organization that many people know today. But at the time, it was a much smaller organization. Not as many people knew about it.
Right.
And I don't know that I would get in today to Teach for America, but much like I don't think I would get into Harvard today. But then I did, and it for me just represented sort of the perfect opportunity to get a job and get paid to do something that would help kind of give back to those kids that I had grown up with. Right. Just as simple as that. And so it's not like I had a particular passion for wanting to teach per se, but I wanted to do that. I wanted to help out those kids that I had grown up with. And so I got sent to Compton, California, and taught for a couple years there. And along the way, I grew up
in Southern Cal, and for those that haven't, Compton's probably one of the toughest spots to teach in California, right?
Yeah, at the time, Compton was in receivership, meaning the state had taken over the school district, and they were just having all sorts of challenges. People think about Compton because it kind of became associated with gang activity and
the rap industry
But, Compton's a much more nuanced community. And at the end of the day, it was at the time I was there, it was just a town, a city that had gone through tremendous change over a really short period of time, demographically, economically, and in addition to some of the violence and the other challenges of poverty that existed there, it was just trying to kind of catch a breath on all the change that it had endured, and that was reflected in the erosion of a lot of their sort of public institutions, corruption at City Hall, corruption in the school system, and which led to really negative outcomes for the kids who were already coming to school with a lot of baked-in challenges.
Right. Yeah. Well, today you're president and CEO of the Atlanta Community Food Bank, and today is Giving Tuesday, and we want to hear a little bit about that. We're actually recording this right before Thanksgiving, but it's going out at that very important date, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But it sounds like just your career really did start in community service. I know that you spent some time with Home Depot in a variety of positions. What kind of got you to Atlanta? Tell us about that trajectory.
Yeah, well, I think the short answer to that is my wife got me here to Atlanta. She grew up here, and we were trying to figure out where we would want to kind of put down roots. I think, given my experience growing up, I did not want kids to kind of grow up moving all over the place. We really wanted to get rooted somewhere, and we were trying to pick a good place to do that. And it kind of came down to we could kind of go to DC and maybe get involved in the political universe, or Atlanta, where she was from and had family here, and it's back in the South, and we picked Atlanta, and I think we've been here 16 years and don't regret it for a day. I mean, we love the city, and all the ways in which it's continued to change and evolve. Right. Atlanta has its challenges, but it's also got lots and lots of great positive things that are making it a great place to live.
So did the Home Depot opportunity come to you after you moved to Atlanta?
Yeah. So prior to coming to Atlanta, I had done a few other things in the nonprofit world. One of them was I helped start the organization Charity Navigator, which many people will know as the sort of largest online evaluator of the financial health of nonprofits around the country. And I was employee. I
served on the board of Direct Relief International out of Santa Barbara for several years, and we were very proud to always be at the top of Charity Navigator's list. So that's a fantastic organization.
Yeah, and so I was employee number 2 at Charity Navigator, and was there on from the beginning, and so I was in the nonprofit world and wanted to kind of stay there. We decided to move to Atlanta, assuming I would find a role here once I got here, which I did. I worked at another nonprofit for a couple of years after I got here. But along the way, I really, as I was bumping into other people kind of in that phase of life when you're in your early 30s, and people are kind of taking on bigger roles and more leadership responsibility in bigger companies, some of the work that they were doing was really interesting, and they were and things that I didn't know how to do and didn't think that I could learn by continuing to work in mid-sized nonprofit organizations. And I thought that ultimately I wanted to be in a role kind of like the one I have today, but felt like for me to get there, for me to be effective once I got there, that learning some of that stuff would be helpful. So I said, well, I can either kind of go get an MBA, right, or I can try to do that.
Who's big in Atlanta?
Yeah, I could go work for a company, then have sort of an MBA on the job, and so I was lucky enough to have some people in the city who took an interest in me and helped me connect with some folks over at Home Depot, and I landed there and worked there for 7 years in a number of different jobs.
Fantastic. And is that how you found out about the Atlanta Community Food Bank?
Yeah, so the Atlanta Community Food Bank was we've been around now for 40 years.
Wow.
And we were founded by this guy, Bill Bowling, who, if you're from Atlanta, you know who he is. He's just an iconic nonprofit leader in the city. And he was someone that when I moved to Atlanta, I was trying to network with folks in the nonprofit world. And he was somebody who I needed to. Everybody said you need to go meet
You
Bill.
get to know him, yeah, right.
So
was he running the food bank at that time?
Yes. So I reached out to Bill when we first moved here in 2003, and he, took my call and met me for lunch, and we kind of stayed in touch over the years. We weren't super close, but we had stayed in touch, and I at some point knew I wanted to get back to the nonprofit space. At the time, I was a store manager for Home Depot in a very operationally intense role. And so I had started networking with some other people in the nonprofit world, to kind of say, hey, I'm interested in coming back. So
where are the opportunities?
Where are the opportunities? And that got back to Bill. And one day he called me and said, hey, look, I need somebody to run operations at the food bank. And 6 months later, I was at the food bank.
That's fantastic. So you came in reporting to him. You were one of his VPs.
Yes. Yeah. And it was at a time where he was already anticipating his retirement.
Right.
And he didn't hire me to be his successor, but he was hiring a couple of other senior leaders to kind of strengthen the
few horses in the race.
Well, that and just to strengthen the senior team to help, regardless of whether or not the successor would be among that group. He wanted to ensure that we had a strong team in place to help steady the ship as we went through what would be a really disruptive transition. When you have a founder for 36 years,
incredible,
who is again just sort of beloved in the community and beloved by everybody around the food bank.
Right.
That's a big transition.
Those are big shoes to step into.
Well, and it often doesn't go well. More often than not, it doesn't go well. And so I think having a good senior team in place was a strong team in place was really important to help steady the ship as we went through that. And so I was part of that transition.
And then you became his successor, or was there an interim CEO?
No, I was the successor. We went through a search process, and I think the board kind of had a moment of just absent-mindedness and selected me for the role. And I'm sure there were many, many great candidates, and but they landed on me, and I it was a tremendous vote of confidence from them, and because they already knew how I was, and for them to sort of entrust me with that great responsibility of following of Bill's footsteps and leading the organization forward meant a lot to me personally. The board's been unbelievably supportive to me in these first 4 years since I took over. And we've had great success. We've really moved the organization forward. We've continued to grow our volume of food that we distribute. We've increased our revenue significantly. We've adopted a really big, ambitious strategy. We've completed a $50 million capital campaign.
Wow.
We're building a new headquarters and distribution center that we're moving to in a couple months. And that's a lot to get done in addition to the other things we've done in a relatively short period of time. And we couldn't have done that had we not had great alignment and support and buy-in from the board.
Right. Terrific. Well, Kyle, tell us just briefly a little bit about the Food Bank's mission and importantly, Giving Tuesday, which this podcast is being launched on.
Sure. So the Atlanta Community Food Bank is one of the largest hunger relief organizations in the country. We support a network of 700 partner organizations. So think about churches or schools or healthcare facilities or other nonprofits. And those partners get food from us and distribute it to people in their local communities who need help. Annually, we distribute through that network about 63 million meals to 750,000 people across 29 counties.
And that's just the greater Atlanta area.
It's just Metro Atlanta and North Georgia.
Wow.
So it's a big, massive kind of food distribution operation.
Right.
But in addition to that, we're also doing a variety of things to work on public policy and advocacy, to provide nutrition education programming to the people we serve, to connect families with additional resources beyond the food that we distribute. And all of that is aimed at helping to close the meal gap in our community. We also have a very robust volunteer program that engages about 30,000 volunteers a year.
Fantastic.
And we have just tremendous support from across the community financially. So certainly we get big checks from big donors in the corporate and foundation community. But we really are proud of the fact that we also have 30,000 individual donors who support us, often with really relatively small contributions. And those relatively small contributions add up to a tremendous amount of support for our mission.
I can imagine.
Giving Tuesday is really important as a way for people to help be part of that effort. One of the things that we're very proud of, connecting back to the Charity Navigator topic, we're a 4-star Charity Navigator organization and have been for 9 consecutive years.
Congratulations.
There's only 3% of the nonprofits that they evaluate that have earned a 4-star rating for that long a period of time consecutively. And we get that rating because we're really good at ensuring that your support gets used to great purpose.
Right.
If every dollar that gets donated to us helps us provide up to 4 meals to people in need across the community. And on Giving Tuesday, today, every dollar that's contributed online at our website, acfb.org, is being matched by one of our corporate partners, a group called Medlytics.
Wow.
Arvind and Tony over there are big believers in the food bank. And so they're matching contributions to the food bank on Giving Tuesday, dollar for dollar. And so that means every dollar you give really provides up to 8 meals to people in need.
Terrific.
So it's a great opportunity to really have a big impact in connecting families in our community with the food they need to be successful.
Kyle, what's that website again? Can you share that with us?
It's ACFB,
Atlanta Community Food Bank.
Yeah, Atlanta Community Food Bank.org.
Or you can just Google Atlanta Community Food Bank, and I'm sure that will come up.
That'll get you there.
Fantastic. Well, Kyle, we're just about out of time, but there's always a couple of questions I'd like to ask before we let you go. There's a lot of folks who have a real heart for their communities nationwide. And, you've been a part of volunteerism for so many years. It sounds like you're grooming that with your children. But when, you're hiring people, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in?
That's a great question. So I think, I look for a couple things. One, I look for humility. 2, I look for optimism. I want people on our team to really just have an innate sense of possibility.
Glass half full.
About the work that we're doing, because the work we're doing is hard.
Right.
We're fighting a problem that's been with us forever and always, and probably will be for as long as we can imagine. So we need optimistic people. And then, I want people who are resourceful, that are able to really, overcome adversity and persevere in spite of it.
Right.
So those are three things I look for sure.
Very important. Lastly, what career and life advice, Kyle, would you give to someone that has their eyes on joining a nonprofit and perhaps leading it someday, as you did it once upon a time?
I think I think the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is just the idea of we all want to work with urgency and feel like we're on our career clock or what have you to kind of get to the next thing as quickly as possible. And that's mirrored in our personal lives. We're all racing around trying to fill up our kids' schedules as much as we possibly can and connect them with all the opportunities they need, and
preparing their resumes for college.
When they're 7. And
right.
And so we're all doing those things. We're kind of caught up in that sort of treadmill. And I think what I've been trying to remind myself of lately is that you just got to take a breath and take the long view. What we're trying to accomplish at the food bank and what I'm trying to accomplish individually, that's a generational effort.
Yeah.
So I think, you want to kind of measure your progress against that yardstick.
Right.
And if that's the way you're thinking about it, you've got to also find other ways to be encouraged about your progress
right.
Along the way. And so I think having patience and a long view and taking a breath on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going can be freeing, and allow you to really enjoy and appreciate what you're involved in today. What impact you're having today is really important.
Yeah.
And appreciate it and value it, because it's going to take a long way to kind of really finish the race.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, listen, Kyle Waide, thank you so much, President and CEO of the Atlantic Community Food Bank. We really appreciate you sharing your journey into the corner office and more about your fantastic organization. And for all of you out there on this Giving Tuesday, as we go into the giving season, let's all remember to be grateful. And if you're capable, see if you can, give some to the food bank. They're doing wonderful work down in Atlanta. And again, you can either Google Atlantic Community Food Bank or AC, let me get that right, fb.org. Is that right, Kyle?
That's it.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your holiday season.
Absolutely. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.